Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, arh.noaa.gov. Get any updates to our forecast there. You can check out any watches, warnings, advisories that we may have out at the time. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. And you can check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and on YouTube. We have channels on all of those so that you can get any updates there. Taking a look now at the advisories that we do have out for the state. All up north and then some by the Norton Sound. Starting in that area, eastern Norton Sound, lower Yukon Valley, and the Yukon Delta all have freezing rain advisories that start at 6 p.m. tonight and then go until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Freezing rain advisory out near St. Lawrence Island extending up to the Bering Coast there, and that is going to be out until 6 a.m. but currently active, that freezing rain advisory. Then up along the Arctic coast going all the way out towards Dead Horse area, we have winter weather advisories out for blowing snow, all three of those out until 9 p.m. this evening. So as we take a look at our satellite imagery, we can notice one of the largest low pressure systems to the south of the Aleutian Islands, but as we watch this loop, you can really see that system starting to stall out, spin in place. It's really begun to occlude, and it is bringing some of that cloud cover over the Aleutian Islands, but not expected to see a whole lot of the winds or precip with that. Looks to be a little bit too far south. As we watch this loop one more time, focusing in on the Bering Sea now, we can see a little minor circulation out in the western Bering Sea and some of the activity from the other lows moving through the area out in the eastern Bering Sea. Zooming in on the state now, first time we look through, we can see a lot of clearing that's happening out through much of the interior, south central, down into the southeast part of the state. High pressure building in, keeping a lot of the precipitation out of those areas. Some clear skies out east as well. And as we watch, again, we can look out in the Bering Sea a little bit closer now and see some of that same activity with a new low developing just to the south of the Alaska Peninsula, and then a lot of cloud cover and precipitation happening along the western part of the state. Taking us down now to our forecast for the rest of this afternoon, we have that low bringing in some rain to the Alaska Peninsula, extending down into the eastern Aleutian Islands. As we get further to the north, expecting to see that mixing with snow, seeing some snow at St. Paul, and then as we get further to the north, becoming just snow. But we do have that low out to the south. Rain not quite making it to the Aleutian Islands, but once again, we can see a lot of cloud cover from that. So we move out over the mainland part of the states, starting in the Bristol Bay area, rain extending to southern parts of the Kenai Peninsula from some flow moving in from the south. A little break in the precipitation until we get around the Norton Sound area. A mixture of snow and rain there with that freezing rain that we saw earlier, and becoming more snow as we get further to the north. Then up along the Arctic coast, seeing some snow and fog and areas of blowing snow with the stronger winds and tighter pressure gradient up along the North Slope coast. Down into the interior, a lot more clear. Still seeing some cloud cover, especially to the north. So we drop down into the south central, starting to clear out once again. And then down in the southeast, primarily pretty clear, but there are some rain showers just off in the eastern parts of the Gulf, not quite making it to the Panhandle yet. As we move into the tonight period, that is all going to clear out as high pressure moves into the Gulf of Alaska. And we're not going to see any activity until we get to the south central with a rain and snow mix extending from southern parts of the Kenai Peninsula up into the Susitna Valley. As we look out over Kodiak Island, not going to see any rain, but they will see some areas of patchy fog. As we move into areas around Sleet Mute, some isolated areas of rain there as well. Moving out through the interior part of the state, not a whole lot of activity, but along the Arctic coastline, we're going to still see some areas of blowing snow, even though we're not going to have any new snowfall, especially in the evening hours, starting to diminish as we get into the morning hours tomorrow. Then down along the west coast of the state, starting off with snow up in the Kotzebue Sound area, but as we move to the southern part of the Seward Peninsula, starting to mix with the rain, still going to see some of those areas of freezing rain throughout the night in areas around Norton Sound. As we move into the YK Delta area, starting to become just a rain and snow mix without the areas of freezing rain. And then down in the Alaska Peninsula, a mix of rain and snow there as well. Throughout the Aleutian Islands, not going to see a lot, maybe some stronger winds starting to build in from the tighter pressure gradient to the south, but the majority of the strong winds staying off in the North Pacific. And then out by the western Aleutian Islands, some isolated snow showers out there. Into Friday, going to continue to see showers throughout the Aleutian Islands with snow out west mixing with rain in the central and eastern Aleutians, including the Alaska Peninsula. Some stronger winds with the tighter pressure gradient out over the Aleutian Islands. And as we move to the Bristol Bay area, a little break in the precip until we get to the YK Delta area, where we're going to have a little bit colder off to the west and going to see some snow along the coastline there, but becoming mixed with rain as we get into the Norton Sound area and places off to the east, and then up in the Kotzebue Sound area as well. We're not going to see any activity along the Arctic coastline down into the interior and much of the south central, but on the eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula extending into the Anchorage Bowl area, you're going to see a mixture of rain and snow on Friday. And then down in the southeast, not any rain, but we will see some stronger winds there as well, especially from that north and northeasterly direction. As we move into Saturday, going to continue to see some of those winds, but starting to weaken a little bit. Not going to see any rain there on Saturday. And along the North Gulf coastline, we do not have any rain happening until we get down to Kodiak Island, where we will see some rain showers due to that southeasterly flow. And then up through the majority of mainland Alaska, extending from the Bristol Bay area into the interior and up along the Arctic coastline. Not going to see any rain or snow there. Just going to see some isolated showers way out there on the western parts of the Kotzebue Sound area, extending down towards Tin City. And then down in the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, going to see some starting off in the eastern parts by the Sand Point and Cold Bay areas, a mix of rain and snow extending down into the central Aleutian Islands. And then way out in the west by Shimia, we are going to see another system moving in from the west, bringing a rain and snow mix there as well. Taking a look now at our temperatures for the state, starting off in the southeast. This afternoon around 2 p.m. saw temperatures getting into the lower 40s, a little bit colder further to the north, with Haines getting to 39 degrees, Juneau 38 degrees, warmer for Ketchikan and Sitka 43 at both of those, and Yakutat 44 degrees. As we move into the south central part of the state, temperatures in the mid to upper 40s for most locations, a little bit colder for Glen Allen, only 11 degrees there. Taking us into the interior part of the state, in the 20s for most locations, some getting up around 30, especially as we get further to the west, getting up to as high as 30 degrees there around the Galena area, and then colder as we get to the Arctic Village and Fort Yukon area, 7 and 9 degrees respectively out there. Along the Arctic coastline, down around 0, some places getting below -6 for Dead Horse, and then warmer as we get further off to the west, where we're seeing a lot of that southerly flow. Down in the Kotzebue Sound area, only getting down to around freezing, with Kotzebue staying at 32 degrees this afternoon. Down in the Norton Sound area, in the mid to upper 30s there, and that'll take us into the southwest part of the state, the YK Delta area, getting up to as high as 40 degrees at Bethel, and then down in the Bristol Bay area, 42 for Iliamna, 43 for King Salmon, 39 degrees this afternoon at Dillingham. Down in the Alaska Peninsula, getting a little bit colder, but still staying around 40 degrees, dropping a little below that 37 for Cold Bay this afternoon. And down in the rest of the Aleutian Islands, getting down to as low as 33 way out west for Shimia, with 34 for St. George. Looking at our lows for tonight, staying out in the Aleutian Islands, dropping down right around the freezing mark. A little bit colder for St. Paul, 29 degrees expected low tonight. In the Alaska Peninsula, getting into the mid-30s for most locations. Down in the Bristol Bay area, dropping to right around 30 degrees. A little bit colder, upper 20s as we move to the YK Delta area, with Bethel getting down to 29 degrees, Macoriac 26 degrees. Warmer as we get further inland, 30 degrees expected low for Aniak. Down in the Norton Sound area, In the mid-20s for most locations, warmer at Nome, only getting down to 34 degrees tonight there. Down into the mid to lower 20s for the Kotzebue Sound area, with Kotzebue getting down to 25. Point Hope going down to 22 degrees. And then up along the Arctic coast, dropping below zero most locations, Barrow -6. A little bit colder down there at Dead Horse, -13 expected low. As we move into the interior, places out in the east getting below zero tonight, such as Fort Yukon dropping all the way down to -21, Eagle -8. But as we move further to the west, Galena only getting down to 11 degrees, warmer out in the western parts of the state. Down in the south central, pretty warm as well, only getting down to around 30 degrees tonight for most of the locations, 31 for Kodiak. Colder for the Glen Allen area, -8 there. Cordova a little bit colder as well, dropping down to 17 degrees tonight. And then in the southeast part of the state, most places dropping down to right around 30 degrees. Colder as we get further to the north. Juneau down to as low as 18 tonight. Yakutat a little colder as well, 15 degrees there, but down for Ketchikan, only getting down to 36 degrees tonight. Switching us over to the high pressures for tomorrow, high temperatures, getting up to around 40 degrees in the southeast. As we move further to the north, a little bit colder. Juneau getting up to 32 degrees, Skagway 30 degrees, 39 for Yakutat. Then moving into the south central, temperatures getting up to around 40 degrees, especially around the Kenai Peninsula, and the upper 30s as we get closer into the Anchorage Bowl into Sitna Valley. And then Glen Allen again colder, 18 degrees expected high for tomorrow. In the interior part of the state, seeing again the temperatures out west a little bit warmer, getting up into the 30s there, but staying in the single digits at 4 degrees for both Arctic Village and Fort Yukon. And then up along the Arctic coast, getting into the single digits there. Barrow getting up to 6 degrees tomorrow. Wainwright a little bit warmer, 12 degrees there. And then as we move into the Kotzebue Sound area, getting into the mid to upper 20s. Taking us down to the Norton Sound area, getting into the mid 30s there, with Nome getting up to 35 degrees expected high tomorrow. Down in the YK Delta and Bristol Bay areas, getting into the mid to upper 30s. A little bit warmer at King Salmon, 40 degrees expected high there. And then into the mid to upper 30s for most of the Aleutians. The exception is out there at Shemya, only getting up to 33 degrees tomorrow. St. Paul expected to get up to 34. Switching it up, going to our aviation forecast. MVFR conditions widespread throughout the northern and eastern parts of the Bering, extending out into the western Bering as well and western Aleutian Islands. Some areas of IFR conditions with a lot of that snow and those winds blowing that snow around along the west coast of the YK Delta area, extending up towards the west coast of the Seward Peninsula as well. MVFR conditions along the Arctic coast with the blowing snow over there. And then MVFR conditions staying off the coastline, but all throughout the Gulf of Alaska. Looking at our passes now, Anaktuvuk Pass should be VFR throughout the day tomorrow. Adigan Pass should also remain VFR, as well as Lake Clark and Merrill. Rainy Pass will start off in VFR, but pretty quickly will become VFR as the day progresses. Windy Pass, VFR conditions expected, as well as Isabel Pass. Mentasta Pass, VFR. Tanita Pass also should be VFR throughout the day. Portage expected to be VFR tomorrow, and Chilkoot and White will both be VFR throughout the day. Looking at our freezing levels, we have some of that warmer air trapped over the northern part of the state, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing those freezing rain conditions out over the Norton Sound area, with some of that warmer air over the colder air at the surface. And then over the southeast part of the state, you can see our freezing line hugging the Gulf Coast, extending out over the southwest part of the state up towards the Seward Peninsula, then out over the central Bering towards the western Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at our icing now over the west coast of the state, extending out into some of the interior. We have between 6,000 and 12,000 feet there, and then out over the western Aleutian Islands between 4,000 and 7,000 feet for tomorrow. With our jet, the bulk of the jet, the strongest part is well to the south, getting up to as high as 160 knots, but in the western Bering Sea, out of a southwesterly direction, 75 knots there. Then out from Kodiak Island, extending out over the western part of the state, southeasterly flow, 80 knots there, going out into the Arctic, and then back down just to the east of the state out of a northerly direction, 90 knots, extending out over the southeast. And then we can see on 9,000 feet high pressure extending in over the state out into the Gulf. Flow out of a northerly direction, only 20 to 25 knots there, dropping down to 15 over the Panhandle. Then out of a southerly direction, moving over the western part of the state. Stronger winds there, getting up to as high as 40 knots. Then as we look out to the west, circulating around the low pressure there, dropping down to 30 to 35 knots over the northern Bering as we move out into the western Bering Sea out of a westerly direction, 20 to 25 knots there. Out over the Aleutian Islands, 35 knots, dropping down to 25 as we move out towards the western Aleutian Islands. Then down to 3,000 feet over the Bering Sea, pretty similar flow. Westerly direction in the northern parts, 20 knots there. Out of an easterly direction towards the Aleutian Islands, 25 to 40 knots, with the strongest speeds being further to the south. The bulk of those higher speeds are going to remain further to the south for tomorrow. Then as we move out over mainland Alaska, southerly flow getting as high as 40 knots, moving throughout much of the western part of the state, dropping down to 30 as we get further to the north. And then a southeasterly flow over the northeast part of the state, 25 to 40 knots there. Pretty weak flow continuing over the panhandle out of a northerly direction, 10 to 15 knots at 3,000. That'll move us to our turbulence chart just off the eastern parts of the Beaufort Sea, below 4,000 feet there, and just hitting the very southern parts of the panhandle below 5,000 feet, extending further to the southeast. But the majority of our turbulence over the western part of the state, with those stronger winds coming in from the south, it's going to bring us some more moderate turbulence below 6,000 feet there, extending from the Bristol Bay area all the way up into the Kotzebue Sound area. And then for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, we have some moderate turbulence there as well, expected for tomorrow below 5,000 feet. And if you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Jupiter and the Gemini twins. Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm Marlene Hidalgo, science teacher from Miami, Florida.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
Right now, the constellation Gemini the Twins is at its best for viewing.
And while most people have heard of Castor and Pollux, the two brightest stars in Gemini, not many people know the story behind this popular constellation.
Plus, there have been quite a few astronomical discoveries made in Gemini over the years. What are we talking about? Let's show you.
Okay, we've got our skies set up for the next 2 weeks, 8 p.m. your local time. Facing due south, we're a third of the way up from the horizon, you'll see the brightest star in the heavens, Sirius, which marks the eye of Orion's bigger dog. And just up to Sirius's right, the bright stars which mark Orion himself.
If you take Orion's ankle star, Rigel, draw a line through the belt stars past his shoulder star, Betelgeuse, you'll run right into the bright stars named for the famous twin brothers in Greek mythology, Castor and Pollux.
Pollux, the brighter of the two, is closer to the horizon, and if you look closely, has a slightly orangish tint to it. Castor, on the other hand, although a tiny bit dimmer, is a bright white.
For over 2,000 years, these two stars were considered the patrons of all sailors and seafaring people.
In Greek mythology, Castor and Pollux were the twin sons of Leda, the queen of Sparta. In one version of the story, Castor's father was King Tyndareus of Sparta, Leda's husband.
Pollux, however, was the son of Zeus. Zeus seduced Leda by transforming himself into the likeness of King Tyndareus. Therefore, when Castor and Pollux were conceived, Castor was mortal, while Pollux was immortal.
Castor and Pollux were not only brothers, they were great friends and were always seen together. Wherever they would go and whatever they would do, you would never see Castor without Pollux by his side, and vice versa.
That is until one day when Castor and Pollux were involved in a feud with their cousins over the ownership of cattle. During this dispute, Castor was accidentally killed. Pollux was so heartbroken by his brother's death that he begged Zeus to kill him so he could be with his brother in the netherworld.
Since Pollux was immortal, he couldn't die. So instead, Zeus placed Castor in the heavens and placed Pollux next to him so they would always be together. To this day, you can see Castor leading the way, followed closely behind by his beloved brother Pollux.
But as ancient as the stories of these twins are, the constellation Gemini is in a region where two other great discoveries were made.
In 1781, the English astronomer William Herschel discovered the planet Uranus in the constellation Gemini. Uranus is the 7th planet in our solar system and takes 84 years to orbit the sun. Uranus is currently in the constellation Pisces, the fish. It won't be in the constellation of Gemini again until the year 2033.
Indeed, and in 1930, Clyde Tombaugh surprised the world with the discovery of everyone's favorite dwarf planet, Pluto, which in 1930 was in the constellation of Gemini. Right now, Pluto is in Sagittarius, the Centaur Archer. Since Pluto takes 248 years to orbit the Sun, it won't be in the constellation of Gemini again until I am 200 years old in the year 2167.
Uranus and Pluto, however, are so far from the Earth that they're too faint to see with the naked eye. Furthermore, who wants to wait until they're old and gray before Uranus and Pluto are in Gemini again?
Well, you're in luck. The giant planet Jupiter is much easier to see, and it's in Gemini this week. For the ancient Greeks and Romans, Jupiter was the planet that represented Pollux' father, Zeus.
Jupiter is the fifth planet from the Sun, and it takes almost 12 years for it to orbit the Sun. So, if you don't get to see Jupiter in Gemini this year, you'll have to wait until June of 2025 to see it in Gemini again.
And again, who wants to wait that long?
So get outside and enjoy Jupiter among the stars of the Gemini twins.
And remember, whatever you do,
Keep looking up.
Welcome back. We'll take a quick look at the ice edge to start us off here. Out in Cook Inlet, we do have some ice there now, but that is going to continue to melt as those warmer conditions continue on throughout the next couple of days. And in the Bristol Bay area, extending out towards Nunavik Island, we have some ice there as well, but that is also going to start to get pushed back by the southerly flow and the warmer temperatures. Taking a look now at the southeast part of the state for the winds and seas. Out in the Gulf, not very much activity out of an easterly direction, around 15 knots there, with seas getting up to as high as 6 feet. Stronger winds as we get into the inside waters out of a northerly direction, 30 knots, becoming more easterly as we get further to the south and dropping off towards around 20 knots. But we have a lot of stronger gusts in the inside waters throughout much of the channel terrain there on Friday. Winds are going to drop down a little bit on Saturday in the inside waters, but not a whole lot. In fact, in the northern part, going to get a little bit stronger, 35 knots out of a northerly direction there. And then stronger in the Gulf as well, now getting up to 30 knots out of a primarily easterly direction, dropping down to around 10 knots towards Yakutat. As we move into the south central, flow largely variable, a little bit of a northerly component in some areas, getting up to as high as 15 knots there. Seas only getting up to about 6 or 7 feet. Not a whole lot of activity even in Shelikof straight out of a southerly direction, 15 knots there. As we move into Saturday, flow becoming more easterly in the Gulf, getting up to as high as 25 knots towards Kodiak Island. And then in Cook Inlet area, coming down to Shelikof straight out of a more northeasterly direction, up to as high as 25 knots there. Seas getting up to around 9 feet further to the south, dropping down to around 1 foot in the Prince William Sound area. Then in the Alaska Peninsula, primary flow out of a southerly direction, 20 to 25 knots. As we get closer to Sand Point, however, easterly flow 25 knots there. Seas 7 to 9 feet on the Pacific side, 5 to 7 feet on the Bering side. Then on Saturday, flow becoming more easterly, getting to as high as 40 knots towards the Sand Point, King Cove areas, and then dropping down to as low as 20 knots out of a northeasterly direction in the Bristol Bay area. Seas now getting to as high as 17 feet furthest to the south and west, and only around 5 feet as we get closer to the Dillingham area there. And as we move out towards the Aleutian Islands out of an easterly direction, up to as high as 35 knots on the Pacific side, 20 to 25 knots on the Bering side, then way out to the west, a more northerly flow, 20 to 25 knots there with some stronger seas, 10 to 14 feet, and then weaker seas on the Bering side, only around 7 to 9 feet there. And on Saturday, flow out west, dropping down 15 knots out of an easterly direction. But as we get over the eastern locations, we're getting a northeasterly flow, getting to as high as 40 knots there, with seas anywhere from 17 to 20 feet on the Pacific side, 10 to 13 feet on the Bering side. Along the west coast of the state, primarily a southerly flow. As we get up closer to the north, we have winds up to as high as 20 knots there. Further out to the west, up to as high as 30 knots, dropping all the way down to 15 closer to the Pribilofs, and seas only getting up to as high as 7 feet way out to the west. Then on Saturday, flow becoming more northeasterly for the most part. However, a weaker flow getting up towards St. Lawrence Island out of a southerly direction, 10 knots there, as high as 30 knots as we get closer to St. Paul, with our seas getting up to as high as 9 feet now, closer to the Pribilofs. Then along the Arctic coastline out of an easterly direction, 35 knots dropping down to 20 knots as we get further off to the west, and then a southeasterly flow, 25 knots along the Point Hope area. Then on Saturday, flow becoming more southerly, dropping down to 15 knots, becoming weak out in the eastern parts as well. Still a more southerly component to it, 10 to 15 knots there, all ice covered along the Arctic coast. Taking a look, a quick recap for tonight. Out over much of the state, including the southeast, and out over the interior, not going to see any kind of precipitation there, but still going to see some light blowing snow conditions along the Arctic coastline, especially in the evening hours. Down in the south central, a mixture of rain and snow, some fog near Kodiak. As we get along the west coast of the state, we are going to have a mix of snow and rain. And as we get closer to the Norton Sound area, that's going to be mixed with a freezing rain, starting to become more snow as we get further to the north. Then along the Aleutian Islands, not going to see a lot of activity until the western Aleutian Islands, where some isolated snow showers will be expected throughout the night. Then on Friday, we are going to see some continued showery conditions throughout the Aleutian Islands, a mixture of rain and snow until we get to the western Aleutian Islands, where just some snow showers expected out there. Along the west coast of the state, further to the west, expected to be a little bit colder. Going to see snow showers along the YK Delta coast, extending up towards the Seward Peninsula, and we are going to see some mixtures of rain and snow for the Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound area. Expecting to start to see those freezing rain conditions be diminished, though, for Friday. And then as we move out over the south central part of the state, eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula, a rain and snow mix expected, extending up into the Anchorage Bowl, but largely the rest of south central should be untouched from precip. And then the interior and along the Arctic coast and the Panhandle, all expected to be void of precipitation, but will be some stronger winds in the inside waters as we look through the Panhandle area with the tighter pressure gradient over that area. And with Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.